You're listening to Vote Her In, a collaboration between two broads talking politics and author Rebecca Sive. Today's guest is Helaine Olen, an opinion writer for The Washington Post and senior managing editor for Public Seminar at the New School. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly. You're listening to Vote Her In, which is a collaboration between two broads talking politics and author Rebecca Sive, coming to you once again from quarantine, although quarantine is lifting in bits and pieces around the country. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rebecca, who will introduce our guest. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and hello to all of you. Yes, we're in quarantine, but it's feeling a little bit brighter, and we may talk about that a little bit with our guest today. Our guest is Helaine Olen, who's a fabulous writer. She's written books. She is an opinion writer for The Washington Post. And she and I met, I don't know, half a decade ago when we were both speaking about women in philanthropy and the need to pay attention to the issues that we all care about. So she has moved on since then to this Post role and to talking more broadly about issues of leadership and politics. So we thought it would be a perfect time to have her join us. So welcome, Helaine. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you for having me on.
So we thought it would be good to begin if you would sort of share with us how you got to the place about writing on, in the first instance, economic issues, but have now significantly broadened your scope and have been writing about women in politics. So if you could trace for our listeners the steps in your career, how and why you've gotten to this place and why you want to stay in this place.
So the backstory as to how I got involved in writing about economics is that I got involved in writing about personal finance. And the way that happened was about over 20 years ago now. Somebody, when I was living in Los Angeles, called me up from the big paper in town, the LA Times, and said, do you want to sub in over and write the Money Makeover feature once over Christmas? I'm going on vacation, and made the fatal error of telling me how much it paid before actually asking if I knew anything about personal finance. And personal finance at that time, it paid a lot more than normal regular day-to-day journalism, because it's specialized journalism, right? So I, of course, heard double my normal rate and knew enough about personal finance to know that that was a really good thing. So I said, of course I know about personal finance. I can do this. And I figured I would write one of these things and I would get a furious phone call from an editor in return for receiving a check for double my normal fee, showing what a mature 30-year-old I was at the time. And instead, what happened was everybody thought I had a flair for this thing and ended up deciding to keep me around. And one thing led to another and led to another. And I ended up writing it for several years. And so when I stopped, obviously, and I thought about it a lot because you're in very intimate relationships with people when you talk about money. I mean, people talk about money. I mean, they don't, right? You're more likely to know about people's sex life than money. I mean, that's a cliche, but it's true. And so I had wanted to write about it because it was an extremely, emotionally intense experience. And I finally did, though not in the way I ever thought I would, which was during the Great Recession. I wrote about something that had always been in the back of my mind, even as I had done the feature, which is, does this really work for people? Personal finance and the stock market had been presented as this great solve to the middle class. Right. But in fact, it, for the most part, is a way the 1% get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. I mean, there's some help for the middle class in there too, but it's not quite what was sold to people. And it's an extremely volatile way to, say, invest your retirement and have your retirement rely on, right? So I wrote a piece about this, and that piece took off, and then I got a book contract to write about that. And, a decade later, here we are, basically. one thing led to another. And I started writing for the Post I think at the end of 2017, October of 2017.
Mm-hmm. And tell us what writing the Post from economics to more broadly economic policy and matters, for instance, that relate to women in economics.
Well, I got brought in. I was initially subbing in at a 3 times a week at one of the daily politics blogs at the Post. And so obviously you're going to write about all sorts of things. I wasn't brought in for my economics background particularly. I mean, they liked it, but they also liked the fact I'd been writing about a lot of other stuff. I'd been writing about Me Too for The Nation a little bit at the time. I had just, been doing, more broad political writing as well. I mean, that's the thing about journalism. I mean, it's almost a joke. You get assigned something, you become an expert in 48 hours. And that's if you're lucky. Sometimes you get 24 hours. And so writing 3+ times a week, you by definition are just going to be broader and broader over time. And the thing about opinion pages, as a rule, is while people come in with a focus, you can write about, obviously people know the vast majority of what I will write about will revolve around money in some way. You really can write about within reason. You can follow your thought patterns where they go. And so you're writing about the daily news. You're writing about Trump. You're writing about feminism. Me Too was tremendous when I started in 2017. So you just sort of expand into it. And that's also a very long way of saying it wasn't like I had developed this sudden interest in women's issues. I'm a Smith College graduate. I've always been interested in women's issues. And in my books on money, I had a very special interest in the stuff women had been told about money and how we are made to feel like we're idiots when it comes to money, when in fact we earn less, need to often do more with that because women have more caretaking responsibilities. And I mean caretaking for everything from the family dog to the kids to the parents to the fact that as a result of that, we go in and out of the workforce a lot more. So, and then of course the response of society is to tell women they need to save more money and invest better than men, which is absolutely bonkers. That's not possible. So, I mean, it's not like this suddenly comes out of nowhere for me.
Right.
So this podcast series grew out of Rebecca's book talking about having the first woman president. Of course, we're not there yet, but it looks like we will have a vice presidential nominee on the Democratic side who's a woman. You, a few weeks ago, wrote a piece about Elizabeth Warren and why Elizabeth Warren is made for this moment. Could you talk a little bit about that and then sort of your thoughts on the other women who might be named VP?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think Elizabeth Warren was a victim of horrific timing in a way. Aside from the fact, of course, she was also a victim of the fact that the standards for women are twice as much as they are for men. But leaving that aside for a moment, she, her entire career in a way is meant for this moment. Elizabeth Warren's signature issue is essentially corruption and how, the wealthiest stratas of our society have over time, subverted the rule of law to make it work for their benefit. And if there is anything we are seeing right now, we are seeing the end result of that right in front of us. We are seeing, over and over again, we have senators who have mysteriously well-timed stock trades. I guess that's a nice way of putting it, right? We've seen, what appears to be borderline profiteering in the sale of desperately needed safety goods. There, are questions about why some cures are getting promoted over others. And at the same time, of course, the other thing about Warren that also makes her perfect for this moment is that in political life, I don't think in our lifetimes we have seen a politician who is as connected to the day-to-day financial concerns of Americans. And that's not a coincidence. I mean, Warren, grew up, in a rocky family with a rocky financial history. She goes on to study bankruptcy. She spends years talking to people in bankruptcy court. she goes on and writes both a big political book about that and then a personal finance book about that, and then goes on TV and starts counseling families on the Dr. Phil show, for goodness sake. I mean, I don't think we have anybody in political life who has talked to families on that level for so many years. So I think she has this almost preternatural sense of how people think about money that comes from the fact she talks to people about money. And so, and in fact, you can see she's been very involved in the various proposals coming out of Congress over and over again. And I think, this would have, I still say this would have made her an ideal presidential candidate, but we are not in that position any longer. And it will make her an ideal vice presidential candidate.
And so any thoughts on the others that you think are important in the event that for some reason Warren is not picked?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have a clue who's going to be picked at this point. And, I think everybody, has their selling points. I don't mean this as Warren good, somebody else bad.
Right.
But, I do feel, I think, Kamala Harris clearly has a very, strong profile and is also, very much in favor of Medicare for all, though on a more graduated way, which I believe is, going to be an increasingly important issue. And by the way, it's already an important issue. But now with, millions of people losing their employer health insurance, believe me, it's about to become an even more important issue. And so I think she really would also add something to the ticket. She's also, obviously African-American, and African-Americans were a huge part of Biden's support. And I think that's important. You do need somebody who, brings in enthusiastic voters as your vice presidential pick. I mean, especially this year, no question about that.
So we wanted to ask you in this context your thoughts about, there are more women filing to run for Congress this year than in any other year, and following in the footsteps of people like Harris and Warren. In light of the current circumstances that you've been talking about, what's your view about how these women should run and what they ought to be saying and communicating to the American public?
Well, I mean, I think the first question is, what chance are they going to get to communicate? Right now, it is all but impossible to break through the noise. Mm. And Christine Smith, who lost to, Garcia in the race for Katie Hill's seat, was talked about this, that it was almost impossible to break through and even get attention. So I think the bigger issue right now is how to help these women get through and get public attention so that people can actually hear from them. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And I think it's something that we're not really giving enough thought to right now. Mm. I don't have a magic answer to that, by the way. Right. But I will say that this is a tremendous issue, and it almost subsumes anything that people are going to talk about. As to what they can talk about, I think some of it's really going to depend on how this pandemic plays out over the next few months. And I think that's still a gigantic unknown. Right. On one side, we have people demanding immediate reopenings. On the other side, we have people predicting mass death if those reopenings occur. The chances are pretty good we're going to end up somewhere in between those 2 points. And how it all will play out within those 2 points is going to determine a lot of how somebody should campaign come the fall. The other part of it is what economic damage are we going to see going forward? And how will that change the American voting public? And you could make an argument that on one hand, it's going to radicalize people because this is simply devastating. There are estimates that unemployment will hit as much as 1/3 by this summer that I have no reason to believe are wrong. At the same time, you could see a pushback. There are, as we have already seen, there's already, people who are very angry over the unemployment payments because, the end result has been that some people who have lost their jobs are getting paid more to sit at home right. than to actually go to work on, say, a supermarket dealing with hundreds of customers a day. And we know historically in the United States that people, after the first rush of we've got to help everybody, and I'm just going to tell you what exactly happened in 2008, there's the, oh my God, we have to help people, followed by, wait a second, why can't these people go get a job sweeping streets? And, they are a bunch of slackers who should have saved, 5 years worth of their salary, because of course we all knew a pandemic was going to happen. And and it can turn on dime. And we saw it happen with the Tea Party in 2008, 2009. It literally went from, oh my God, we have to help these people keep their houses, to those losers, they bought a house they couldn't afford. And everybody promptly forgot that people had been had by the banks. Right. So I think this is a really important thing. And I think it's something that people on the left really need to keep in focus, because I think right now there's a real feeling that this is going to be a radicalizing moment for the American population. And while I agree it's going to be a radicalizing moment for the population, radicalizing goes both left and right. And I don't think it's clear which way this is going to go yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Probably just told you stuff you didn't expect me to say.
No, you are on point, I think.
Speaking of, not being able to cut through the noise, I looked back and I think every one of your pieces since late February has, of course, referenced the pandemic, talked about the pandemic or unemployment caused by it or stimulus package that they're working on because of it. What do you see as sort of the direction of your writing in the next few months, leading up to the November election? There's going to be so much about politics and economics that are so intertwined and intertwined so deeply with the pandemic. What do you see as sort of, do you have a longing for writing about something that's not pandemic related? Is that even possible?
I mean, at the moment, I'm like, rooting for some really good Harry and Meghan news so that there's something else to write about. But I don't know, because I don't know where this is all going. My suspicion is it's going nowhere good, but that tends to be my default set, that I think most things tend to end in bad ways that you can't predict. Bad situations have a way of ending badly. And I don't think this one will be much of a, will disprove me on that. But how, what will happen, I don't know. Some of this is going to depend. Is there going to be a second wave of this virus, or is that it? We don't know the answer to that yet. Will it pass? I don't know the answer to that. How will the economy react as that moment comes? I don't know. If it happens in a month, things might pick up quickly. If it happens 2 years from now, we're looking at mass devastation. So it's very hard to say what we're going to be writing about, except to say that we're going to be writing about this in some way.
Right. And in that context, you've talked about the particular problems that small businesses face. And of course, many of those are women-owned. Could you talk a bit about, without knowing what the future looks like, the kind of policy changes you believe ought to happen now to help those small business owners and those women survive, as well as the survival of the women workers that they employ and who are employed elsewhere, who apparently, according to what I've read, are feeling the brunt of the unemployment?
Right. I mean, part of this is women tend to work in more service-oriented professions, and service-oriented professions really took the hit from this. I mean, if you were a nurse working with the elderly, it's there's a lot of work for you, but most people are not, if you're a childcare worker, you're out of work right now. Right. So I think that's one thing. And I think it, by the way, gives lie to one of the ideas that came out of the last recession that I was always skeptical about. And you can see it in my writing, that, the world was going to be women's in the next couple of decades, that men had lost more jobs than women, and that women, were showing more, doing more brain power jobs. And by definition, therefore, women were going to, start being the success stories of the economic world, which I felt was always kind of Pollyanna-ish about the ongoing economic discrimination against women. And I use the word discrimination very deliberately, by the way. People always blanch when I use it. But it is what it is. And I think, by the way, we've seen this. So this recession / depression has definitively given lie to that. Okay. So, but the second thing is going on is there's a couple of different things going on in the small business arena right now and how to potentially help them. The Paycheck Protection rule passed by the Congress and signed into law by Trump as part of the CARES Act were, enormously not, helpful to many small businesses. They were complicated. They favored the larger of the big businesses, the larger of the small businesses. Keep in mind, small business is this thing that is defined as everything from 1 or 2 employees to upwards of 500 employees. So, which, by most people's standards is kind of on the larger side. Then it also got redefined in such a way so that to help franchisees where it would be 500 per location. So like, say you're McDonald's, all of a sudden, your franchisees are eligible for loans. It's not clear whether they're really small businesses or not. So that's just the first problem. The second problem was that in the favoring of the larger of the small businesses, by definition, you disfavored women and minorities who tend to have the smaller of the small businesses. Then there's the legislation itself, which essentially demanded that people spend 3/4 of the money on payroll, which ignored the fact that people have rent to pay, for instance, which we're already seeing the fallout of, in particularly the restaurant sector. There was no real thought given to that. The money is not open-ended. It's complicated to apply for. And, it sort of goes to demonstrate, we've had this long ongoing schism in American life where we, on one hand, talk about small business and we talk about how much we revere small business and we revere entrepreneurs in this country. And in fact, on the other side, the rate of entrepreneurs peaked in the late 1980s, and we could start, the number of small businesses to big businesses, the ratio. It is increasingly harder for them to make a go of it. It is, because of things like the way we run our healthcare coverage, small businesses who we adore supposedly end up paying more for healthcare coverage than large businesses, something that, say, Medicare for All would totally eliminate. Major disadvantage for small businesses. And, it's just this sort of myth that we, like small businesses. The other thing I'd point out is the increasing consolidation of bigger players also makes it harder for small businesses to get by. And this has also been a factor, again, in the Paycheck Protection, where, quote, small businesses, Shake Shack got outed, basically, and shamed into returning the money back. And by the way, small business here in quotes, versus the local hamburger stand. And, the fear is that we've already been dealing with mass consolidation and, increasing corporatization of our lives. And we're going to see more and more of that, the small businesses that give our towns and villages and cities such a, nice feel are going to be gone. And like Cheesecake Factory is going to be the survivor. And I happen to like Cheesecake Factory, but I don't think we should have a world where it's just Cheesecake Factory and other chain restaurants.
So you're a New Yorker. We were talking briefly before we got on the recording about how things are starting to open up and seem sort of happy again in New York. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like there and what's been done right, what's been done wrong in New York?
What's been done wrong is almost everything, but it's definitely better than it was about a month ago. I walk my dog several times a day, so I'm out several times a day. And in mid-March to early April, when I would walk the dog, especially at night, I would be on my street and I wouldn't see a car come for like 5-10 minutes. I would sometimes stay out there to see if I could wait till a car showed up. And just to be clear why I would see cars, I live about 2 blocks from the George Washington Bridge. So to not see a car in my neighborhood at any time of the day is a very rare event. And then, of course, that stopped. And now, of course, I always see cars. Even if I walk the dog at 1 a.m, I see cars. There's more people out at all hours. I don't know where they're going and where they're coming from, so I don't want to say what they're doing. But at least in my corner of the city, things have definitely picked up with spring. More of our restaurants have reopened for at least takeout. There's definitely more people around. That's not to say things are back to normal. They most certainly are not anywhere near normal. And you couldn't miss that even if you just ignored everybody wearing masks. Most people wear masks, by the way. I don't see a huge pushback to masks. But what I would say is that, New York did a load wrong. And, there's this sort of idea that the pandemic was managed well here. And I'm not sure where anybody could have possibly gotten that idea from. A huge number of our deaths were in nursing homes, like we're everywhere else. Well, in fact, when nursing homes resisted taking back patients with COVID-19, they had sent to the hospital. The state government ordered them to take them back, which of course only increased the pandemic here in New York, which is extraordinary and is something that should be getting a lot more attention. Similarly, when it came to shutting down the city, the West Coast was frankly way ahead of us with facing some of the same issues. And it's probably one of the reasons why we were hit so much worse. Here, there was real resistance to shutting down prior to St. Patrick's Day, which is a major day for the bars and restaurants. So I understand what the thinking was. But the result is that there was a massive push to keep things open. And, it wasn't really canceled until a few days beforehand. Whereas other cities had been canceling their parades and, festive occasions weeks earlier. I mean, Dublin canceled before New York City, for goodness sakes. I mean, that's how out to lunch we were here on this. So I think this idea that New York really managed this well is a mass exaggeration. It's just not true.
Well, we want to close in a timely way and say that we hope that everyone around the country learns from the challenges that you've identified, certainly related to the pandemic and also to women's role and opportunity in all of this. So, Helaine, thank you so much for joining us. It's a treat. I have to just, of course, thank you again so much for endorsing Vote Her In. It's really lovely to be in concert with you on that topic. And we hope you'll come back and join us and talk again, and we'll see where we're at that point.
Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.